Well, hello everyone. I hope you're having a great day today. Welcome to Monday's edition of Take 5. We had such a great day in the house of the Lord yesterday. We got to worship together. Not to mention we celebrated Father's Day. And if you missed yesterday and you happen to be a father, let me just say happy belated Father's Day to you. We're thankful for the dads that God has given us and the godly example that they instill in our lives. I'm telling you, the world would be worse off if it were not for the godly men out there that make up godly dads all over this planet. So, hey, I started a message yesterday. Now, I don't think it's going to be a series. I don't believe it is. So maybe I shouldn't say I started a message. Maybe I ought to say I preached a message yesterday that I entitled simply this, Finding Your Inner Child. Now, I've taught about this before. As a matter of fact, 3 years ago on Take 5, I didn't preach one Sunday, but I still did a series of devotions that week from this passage of Scripture that I actually preached on today. And I want to use that to bring to our understanding some things that I think are really necessary, a balance to our walk with God that I believe Jesus is going to teach us that's very necessary. Now, we may not get to cover all the points that I covered in the message this week because there were, I think, 8 or 9 of them. So we may not get to cover them all, but I think we'll cover enough where you'll get the understanding of what God is trying to speak to us through His Word. Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 4 read like this. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" So Jesus called a little child to him and placed the child among them, sat him on his lap, and he said, "Truly I tell you, unless all of you change or be converted and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So he's not talking about going to heaven, that place of eternal rest and reward. He's not talking about that. The kingdom of heaven, that's God's way of doing things, and the way that God functions. It's the parameters and the blueprint of His Word. It's how the kingdom functions. That's what he's talking about. So he says to these grown disciples, unless you are converted, unless you change. The word convert there means to twist, to turn around, to reverse. So basically he's saying unless you revert back and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of the child, this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Finding your inner child is what we entitled this thing, and it's something that every one of us have got to stay in contact with. Now, I realize it can be offensive to some people if you call them childlike, especially, if it's in the right situation where maybe they were acting a little foolish like a child and you call them childlike. Ladies, you ever done your husband that way? Well, it can be kind of offensive. Most would not consider the term childlike a very appealing description of an immediate follower of Jesus Christ. Many adults would view this as degrading to their character and their spiritual maturity because we have the idea that to be great in the work of the kingdom, you got to know more, have more, and be more, and do more. And that's not what Jesus is saying here. But it is the mindset that the disciples had because when you read the synoptic accounts of this passage in Mark 9 and in Luke 9, you'll find that the reason this conversation is going on is because the disciples are arguing with one another over who's greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now imagine this, church folks arguing with one another. God's people, disciples, arguing with one another over who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. I think what really brought this disagreement on, though, was the fact that Jesus on several occasions outside of the 12 would pull Peter, James, and John aside from the rest of the disciples, and he allowed them to be a part of ministry and receive some revelations that the others did not get. And so that pressed them guys and frustrated them guys and made them guys envious and jealous. And now here they are arguing with one another, the 12. The 12. Jesus has got just 3 years before to teach them before he's going to be crucified and rise again after he's buried and ascend back to the Father. And these guys are arguing over who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So these guys are contending among themselves over this foolish notion. So they decided to let Jesus solve the issue. And the answer he gave them really was not what they expected, because Jesus said that it wasn't any of them that would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He said it's actually this little child. Now you can imagine the confusion in the mind of these first followers of Jesus as they were trying to find their place in the kingdom by growing in the works of God that they were doing and growing in the knowledge that they had of God's plan. And now Jesus is saying that it's none of these things that makes you the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, but you must become childlike. So what's he saying? First of all, we think we're supposed to grow up. Now he's telling us to be like a child. What in the world is he getting at? So understand this. He's not talking about these adult disciples becoming childlike in their knowledge and in the working of the kingdom. He's talking about these adult disciples humbling themselves and becoming completely dependent upon God, taking the position of a child with their faith and trust and love. Now, the fact is, the scriptures do tell us that we're supposed to grow and we need to mature in God and the knowledge of His Word. In fact, Paul tells us in the book of Ephesians that God gave the church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to grow us up. He said, until we all come to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood. He goes on to say we're to become the full stature of Christ, so we no longer be children. And he says in the last verse that we're to speak the truth in love so that we can grow up into Him. So as believers, we are commanded to be mature in our understanding of the doctrines of the Scripture. We should absolutely be mature in that and grow up in that. God expects us to continually grow in our knowledge of His Word so that we can readily take on the image of Christ, because it's through the Word that we become more like Jesus. However, in faith, in attitude, in character, in humility, in love, in worship, in trust, and all of these things, we're to take the position of a little child. There are just some things that children have that we must never outgrow. Some things we should never lose. I believe it's best described as what I call the dual nature of the believer. The dual nature of the believer is this. We're to be mature men in understanding, but we are to take the position of a little child in faith and in trust. Do you see the difference there? There's a balance that we've got to pursue, and we've got to put one foot on one and one foot on the other. Believers cannot act like children in knowledge and adults in faith. And that's what a lot of people want to do. They want to have no knowledge of the Bible, never study the Bible, never learn it, never grow in it, and then they want to be, have this great kind of faith that, the world has never seen before. And that doesn't happen. So you cannot act like children in knowledge and adults in faith. The proper position of this scenario should be this. We act like adults in knowledge and we act like children in faith. This is how Jesus said it. And I'll reread this before we close. Truly I tell you, unless you change and are converted and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven and do great things in the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Finding your inner child. That's what we're talking about this week. It's something that we cannot afford to miss. God is expecting us to revert back to some things that we had when we were first saved. Hey, I've got to get out of here. It's been good being with you today. I look forward to being with you tomorrow on Tuesday's edition of Take 5. Till then, God bless you. Have a great day. Hey, trust the Lord, my friend. He will never fail you.